What are we doing that is leading the world in terms of this area, digital payments, fraud protection?
Our centralized capabilities are quite advanced, and they have been for a while. In South Africa, we have designed and agreed on the most common fraud typologies that we're experiencing. We've created a standard. We've implemented that standard amongst the institutions, and that's the book of work that we're working towards when we're trying to say, you know what, it's phishing scams this year. And it will change. Fraud evolves. It changes. It's not static. But what it does is it gives us a benchmark, because we're wanting to move away from the reactive approach that we've always had with fraud prevention, now moving into the proactivity. Can we see what's coming down the line?
Fraud Week is an opportunity for us all to have this conversation and just be slightly more aware. You're tired, you're busy, you're stressed, you're running a massive business. Digital payments are growing fast, but so is fraud. Today on ITWeb Business TV, we're sitting down with Ursula Pearson-Williams, the head of fraud at PayInc, to talk about what needs to be done. How should people be aware of different fraud types? What should institutions be doing to try and mitigate the impact of fraud? What collaboration needs to take place between institutions and regulations? Today, we're going to dig under the surface and find out far more about fraud, especially in light of the incoming Fraud Week. So tell us a little bit more about what the fraud landscape looks like out there. What is it that people should be aware of, and why? Why should they be worried?
I think in South Africa, the introduction of digital payments, instant payments, is really evolved the sophistication and the evolution of fraud.
These issues are not unique to South Africa. They're not. But what are some of the global best practices or global approaches that are currently being used that we could benefit from?
So when it comes to South Africa, you'll hear a phrase that we will look globally and internationally, and we will certainly research. But the question is, what is best for South Africa because of our uniqueness of our society, because of our economic challenges and the diversification in South Africa? While frauds may mutate and they may be common globally, there are some very unique frauds to South Africa as well. So when we look at the best practices, we look at them in the context of how can we change them and then filter them into South Africa as opposed to just copy and paste and adopt them. But we are looking at other countries that have very similar society challenges than us. So you've got Brazil PIX. You're looking at how they are actually managing their fraud. And it's about lessons learned more than it is about, oh, I like that policy. It sounds good. I think it can work in South Africa. But what's more important is where it has been adopted in those countries, how well has it worked, and what are the lessons learned, and how have they evolved what they've done and implemented in order to make it the best practice. So there is a lot of initiatives that have taken place globally. The first one is, well, not the first, but one of them is the Brazil PIX. How they structured their operational framework from a country perspective in terms of creating committees that look at risk and fraud, and how have they filtered that back into their design of their instant payment solution. Then you take a look at the UK and you look at the mechanisms that they implemented way after instant payments was launched, 12 years ago now?
Yeah.
You're now looking at confirmation of payee. So you're looking at what is that mechanism? Has it reduced fraud? Has it mitigated? How has it brought the consumer closer to the bank in terms of the shared responsibility? I believe that report comes out now at the end of the year, so we'll have some good learnings from that. And then you look at other countries which are far more mature in their approach. You look at Malaysia, you look at Australia, who've implemented consortiums like anti-national scam centers. They've actually built scam centers where there's a consortium and a policy and operational framework to help consumers directly in support of their banking institutions. So there's definitely a whole lot of initiatives that are happening globally that we're looking at and that we are adopting in relation to pulling out what will be beneficial for the South African environment.
And on the flip side, I'd like to say this because I do think we have a lot to be proud of. What are we doing that is leading the world in terms of this area, digital payments, fraud protection?
Our centralized capabilities are quite advanced, and they have been for a while. And I think one of the biggest accolades is that while we may have, and I use the term very lightly, an immature society when it comes to financial payments and instant payments, with PayShop only being released 2 years ago, is that ultimately, both from a fraud control, a integration into our participants, and the collaboration at that level is far more advanced than in some international countries around the world, which we can be very proud of. There are other elements as well, in that one of the key areas is around what is the actual fraud problem in South Africa. And in order to be able to identify that, you're really needing a common book of language that you're working, towards and against. So in South Africa, we have designed and agreed on the most common fraud typologies that we're experiencing. We've created a standard. We've implemented that standard amongst the institutions. And that's the book of work that we're working towards when we're trying to say, you know what, it's phishing scams this year. And it will change. Fraud evolves, it changes, it's not static. But what it does is it gives us a benchmark, because we're wanting to move away from the reactive approach that we've always had with fraud prevention, now moving into the proactivity. Can we see what's coming down the line? And it's that collaborative piece of work that has really evolved over the last couple of years, that has really just put us a little bit of ahead in terms of taking the lessons learned from the internationals, communicating and working with them, but also looking at South Africa in terms of what do we need to do from a South African perspective to ensure that we can prevent fraud from happening.
Yeah, and actually, this proactive approach versus the reactive approach obviously has numerous benefits. But one of the things that I think you've really opened the door for so nicely right now is, what should institutions be doing now? What should they be thinking of for the next, I would say, 12 to 24 months? What are some of the things that they really need to be aware of or planning for, considering, so that they can maintain this proactive approach?
The institutions are doing a lot.
Okay.
And I think that the more fraud evolves, I think that they, based on their customer base, based on their products and services, they know that best. It's the collective that we need to focus on in the next 2 years. It's how does the collective community and across the markets come together to create a standard that is a minimum risk standard. And what I mean by that is that we never want to restrict either the consumer from having a good customer experience by putting so many fraud controls that it creates the friction. But we also need to understand that we need to protect the consumer and protect the institution at the same time, because it's not one or the other. So what it is, it's about coming together as a community to say that individually, you know your customer, you know your products, and you're doing well within that regard. But we know that the weakest links will create a chain reaction, and because fraud moves. So while you may be doing it well, all that's going to happen is fraud's going to move to the next institution. So collectively, we need to come together to say, what is that minimum risk criteria and control that we want to collectively implement? And then you can individually go and create the tiers for your specific customer and market. The second thing is we can do that, but regulation and legislation and policy does need to change. At the moment, as well adopted as papaya is, it does cause some restrictions from a fraud community across the entire value chain. So when we're talking about institutions, now we're actually talking about, well, once that fraud is being committed, we have to go into the criminal and justice system. We have to get the SAPs involved. We have to get the hawks involved, depending on the type of crime that's being committed. We have to get into the legal aspect of that. So how does policy and legislation help us across that value chain that supports the operational activity that's happening on the ground in order to be able to close out the event that's happened? So what we've got is you've got the proactive approach happening within the institutions. You have a collective approach that needs to happen with the institutions, but don't ignore the value chain from the end-to-end fraud prevention and detection perspective.
Yeah, we need to keep every link in the chain as secure as possible and as aware as possible, I guess, which is also absolutely critical. And, I think this conversation is obviously taking place at a most opportune moment. We have Fraud Week right? And Fraud Week is an opportunity for us all to have this conversation and just be slightly more aware. You're tired, you're busy, you're stressed, you're running a massive business. Um, what do you feel consumers really need to take away from this conversation as we talk about fraud? What do they need to take away so that they feel protected, so they stand firm as their link in the chain?
Breathe. And what I mean by breathe is you've touched on the point, right? We're tired. We're also excited about the fact that it's almost holidays.
Yes.
And what happens is in our rush, in our everyday life, we forget to breathe. So when you're making a payment, when you're online, when you're standing at the ATM, or when you're speaking on the phone, just take a moment to ask the questions, does this sound or look right? Because it's in our rush that actually the mistakes begin to happen. And so the first thing for me is just be still and breathe. And that's just it. There is absolutely no rush. So taking that instant gratification and just slowing it down a little bit. The second is be conscious of your environment. I think that we still have a predominantly cash environment, even though ATM seems to be far and few between. Just take a look at your environment. Look who's standing behind you and on the side of you, and make sure that you just cover your card when you're putting in your PIN number, just to ensure that there's an extra level of security. And then the third one is that if you are going to get an SMS, double check that telephone number. Don't press on that link, whether it be on an email or whether it be, rather go to your official banking site and take a look at that email address, take a look at that cell phone number and make that call, return that call. You do not have to answer the questions. You do not have to provide your information. And talking on that note, at no point provide your ID information or your accounting details to anybody that's phoning you. No banking institution will ask you for that information if they have phoned you up front. And if they do ask you information and you feel that this shouldn't be the information that you're asking, take their details down and then phone your bank to say you've received a call and you would like to share the details or update them accordingly.
Thank you so much, Ursula. That was amazing. I really appreciated having you on this on the show today, and I think you have shared some amazing, if terrifying, insights with everyone. And hopefully, everyone will walk away a little bit more informed.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here today.